right now. All right, everyone, welcome. I can see you logging on and joining. I know we've got yoga teachers from all over joining in today, and I know some of you are watching live and some of you are watching the recording. So welcome to those of you joining on now. Welcome to those of you watching later. This is 5 ways to support trauma survivors in your online yoga classes. So I'm going to touch today on some principles of trauma-informed yoga, try to give a little more context based on what we're all going through right now, and just give you some support as you're supporting so many other people online. I've been in my office. This is my office and seeing clients mostly online. Some of you are therapists too, so you're feeling this Zoom intensity. So I just did a bunch of jumping jacks just to try to regulate myself because I've been sitting so much. So if you need to get up and move around, I do encourage you to try to stay focused, but just technically speaking, you're gonna get this recording, right? So don't worry if there's tech stuff that comes up, we'll send out this recording and you'll have access. Also, just another technicality, we will send out, I will post these notes in the video right below the recording. So if you want to later on print this out, write down your own notes, you can do that as well. And of course, I encourage you just to take your own notes as we're going today. So my name is Lisa, you pronounce my last name Danilchuk. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also an experienced registered yoga teacher. I know many of you who registered for the call, so I'm thinking about you as we're presenting, and today's April 21st, it's a Tuesday. I know it's a crazy time and space, but we have to kind of keep tracking that as we go. All right, so let's get into this. The first thing I want to say about any kind of online offering right now is it's so important for us to root ourselves and root our teachings in resourcing. So what do I mean by that? Resource means a lot of things. I think of resource as care, but also as anything neutral or positive. We're all going through a lot of stress right now, and offering something that helps us cope with that is the most important thing. Obviously, that's what most of us are doing through offering yoga. And the first step of that, of resourcing first, is really caring for yourself. Now, we've all heard this, self-care, community care, all of that is challenged because we're adapting right now, but it's also even more important. So whatever you can to nourish yourself, like do that. Ideally before you even schedule your online offering or record your online offering or go into it in that moment, right? Like I said, I literally just went into jumping jacks because I was like, I've been sitting a lot. Like, this is what my body needs. I need some movement. So take care of yourself. A great way, and we talked about this last week, if you weren't on that webinar, I can absolutely send the recording with this one, but we talked about connecting to your environment. I gave the example last week of looking at a green plant on my desk. Nature, for a lot of reasons, can help us resource, help us find relief, help us heal even. Obviously, plants and trees give us oxygen. I think there's also a very deep biological relationship we obviously have with the earth, but also with growing things that helps bring a sense of relief. So connecting not just to maybe the room you're in, but the wider sort of environment around, as long as that's safe and not super upsetting or triggering. Like, I literally have my little plant right here, you can see. So connecting to your environment. I also gave the example last week of looking for 5 things that are green. Those are things that can help us during this time. And I want to speak specifically to teaching an online yoga class. You might be in a Zoom webinar like this, or a meeting room where you can see everybody's bodies. I've been in classes where it's really challenging for the teacher because everyone has, maybe they have their camera on, but it's all different angles and different lighting and different shadows. And I think just like you would in a studio, you might come in and if things feel chaotic for you as a teacher, offer a few simple points to sort of organize the space. Obviously, choice is important, we're going to get to that, but it can also be really helpful to bring some of that structure in. So saying something like, let's all try to align our cameras towards the front edge of our mat. Easier in smaller groups, right? Connecting to your environment and what works for you on this side of the camera, connecting to the environment of the other person on the other side of the camera, easier in one-on-ones or smaller groups, a little more challenging in larger groups, but still possible, right? So something like, let's all have our long edge of the mat facing the camera if possible. That's an invitation you can share for sure, right? Another thing, and we mentioned this last week, drishti or gazing points. Those can be super helpful. There's this awkwardness with any kind of online chat where we end up like, I'm looking at the notes or I'm looking at myself, or right, we're not quite connecting eye to eye. So you can use, on my computer, it's a little green light that feels a little more like eye contact. Now it also feels a little more strange if you're on the looking end, like, oh, I'm looking into your eyes, you beautiful green light of a computer. Feels a little robotic, right? So it can be super helpful to think about your real students. If you can't see them on the screen, maybe put a picture of someone next to it. Write down a few names of people, like I was thinking of, you know, Tara might watch this, or Julie, or Esther, or Alex, or, right? Like, who am I speaking to? Then you have a little more of a conversation alive in your head, especially if you're on one of these like pre-recorded things, or if you're offering something where you can't see your folks. Okay, so drishti, your gazing point, looking at your people, right? Seeing their picture or just seeing them in your mind's eye. And also you can work with how you're teaching other people in terms of a drishti. If you want to cultivate something that feels a little more engaging, you can actually ask or encourage people to connect to some degree. I think it's super helpful to be explicit about that beforehand, because I think people are just signing up for yoga and showing up as they are, and that's great. So if you are wanting to have people check in or say their names or all of that, I just make sure that's clear beforehand, especially if you're in a meeting room type of setup. Okay, so another great resource is grounding. Now, I think most of you who are listening have heard of this before, but I'll just repeat. Anything that connects you to support underneath you, right? It could even be my hands on the desk. It could absolutely be my feet on the floor, or my sit bones on the chair, or the bolster, or the mat. It could also be connecting to the earth below that, okay? So going, oops, even a little bit deeper. You can use any area of your body that feels safe or resourceful. If you're teaching a class to your people, you probably have a sense of what that is. You can, if you don't, you can just go with sort of traditional grounding points, feet, right, sit bones, but just be mindful of who you're working with and what might be more resourceful or safe for them. I'll just give an example. Like if you were working with survivors of sexual exploitation, you might stay away from sit bones or anything that's in the pelvic area. You might focus more on feet or hands or things that are a little less vulnerable or sensitive areas of the body, right? So like I said, I will share a link to last week's 3 ways to use body and breath to cope during crisis. We give a lot of great tips during that, okay? And this little image helps me in so many ways. It's like nurturing, right? If there's a little seed in the ground, you water it and give it light, and you don't shout at it, right? Like it's easy to look at something like that and give it kindness and care. Plants, like I said, are also a great drishti point for me personally. And in this picture, you also see the actual earth, right? Our connection to the ground is one thing, our connection to the earth is a whole other level of grounding or earthing. All right, so let's move on. So first resource. Then I think it's great to normalize. Like I already said, we're all going through a pretty crazy time right now, right? This is unprecedented. You've heard all the words we're using to describe it. It's a whole new paradigm that we're facing, and new problems that we're trying to solve in our lifetime at least, right? And in this sort of day and age of the internet and air travel. So normalizing that, great. This is a big, big change. Recognizing that, super helpful. When there's change, we need to adjust and adapt. And sometimes that's really difficult. Sometimes it's also great to learn new patterns, like learning a new language as your brain develops, like into older age. Great to do. So there is some benefit to us having to adapt, but normalizing that this is a change and this is an adjustment, and that there can be stress with that, right? There can be like, oh my God, all these decisions. All of a sudden I've got cognitive overload because I have to think about all these new things I wasn't thinking about, or I have behavioral overload because I'm changing all these behaviors at once, and it's right? So it's normal. It's okay to feel stressed with that. It's also super common for people to feel anxiety, right? Fear of the unknown, grief at either real loss or imagined or impending potential loss, and just fear in general. Like I said, when things are unknown, one of the most common anxious thoughts is like, well, what if this and what if that? And when there's a problem, when there's a change, our brain wants to solve it to the end. That's fine. That's normal. That's common human brain behavior. But we're in a place where we just can't do that. So there's plenty of yoga tools we can offer, right? Like coming back to the present, being aware of our thoughts, interrupting our thoughts, all of that helps. But for the purposes of this point, just normalizing this without excessively focusing on it. Like, I'm going to move on from this slide relatively quickly. I have been in classes where people want to, people throw sort of news quotes in, like, this is what's happening in the world, and let's really see it, and let's really get into it. And my opinion is that right now, what people need more is the resourcing and the support. There is a flood, and this relates to PTSD and trauma. There's a flood of all this like really upsetting information out there. So most of us don't need more of that. Also, many of you listening right now and many of our students self-identify or otherwise, as being very sensitive and very empathic. So most people who feel very sensitive and very empathic don't need more information about how much suffering there is right now, especially if they can't do anything about it, right, in the moment. So when you're coming to yoga, helping to resource people so that they can be in that place where they feel self-regulated, and then they can, right, choose what they can do to work with the grander situation. So just to summarize, I recommend normalizing all of these feelings, totally typical for a human being right now across the world, but also not to sort of catastrophize more as we're already in a catastrophe, okay? This is a global situation. I know there's a lot of talk about, we're in this together, but there's also disparities, very important to be aware of in general, and something that I think particularly in like a 60-minute online yoga class, I would focus more on offering empowering choices. So we'll move on to that next, yeah? So normalizing, yes, we're all stressed. Yes, we're all in this together in some way. We're having a shared experience globally, which is pretty unique. From there, just offering some empowering choices, right? Why is this important? In trauma-informed yoga in particular, choice has become a really popular thing to talk about for such good reason. It's so important that we offer people choices, and as yoga teachers, we're not replicating patterns of abuse or becoming sort of dictators. That's not what the role of yoga teacher is about, in my mind, especially healing, if you're offering a healing environment. So choice is really about power and control and freedom. And because we are all pretty much across the board raised in, I guess there are some exceptions to this, as most things, raised in environments where there's some abuse of power or authority, or there's even like within schools in the US not that long ago, within my parents' lifetime, there was corporal punishment in the classroom. We have this heritage or lineage, even in terms of colonialism throughout the world, of oppression and of being sort of forced into things. This is the right way, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. So it's important to consider in your teaching of anything, and in your teaching of something so sensitive like yoga, where we're using the body and we're talking about our mind and emotions potentially, it's really important to create this sense of freedom and to remind students that they have control, that they're in power, right? They have the power, right? And different from empowering, but related. So something as simple as at the beginning of class, saying something like, everything I offer here is an invitation, right? Everything's a suggestion. I can't see your practice right now. So it's even more important that you listen to yourself. It's even more important that you back out if there's pain, because I can't see and kind of help you monitor that. I'm not in the room supporting you in the same way. Or if you do have a meeting where you see everyone, it's harder, right? It's harder to pick up, like, is that a focus face? Is that a grimace? Are you pushing into pain, right? It's harder to tell if someone's clenching their jaw and things like that. So the empowering choices are really about freedom. And so as an instructor in this environment and in a studio, you can really offer how to use these shapes. And this is where we go back to the last slide. If you're feeling anxious, try grounding, right? If you're feeling fearful, try focusing on something in the present moment, right? A simple green plant or a simple green light. I love the color green. Or, right, using the shapes that help to cultivate balance, help to offer more sort of uplifting or energizing, help to cultivate soothing, things like that. We can kind of offer the experiences we have and what we know of the shapes and what they can benefit. Now, this is not to be diagnostic or medicinal about the yoga, but just to offer some general sort of knowledge based on our experience. We can say how to use yoga shapes. We can offer how to use breath, focusing on inhales, focusing on exhales. Like I said last week, encourage just easy breath, right? Breathing in general, and finding some ease around the edges. So these offerings are really responsive choices based on what you know of your people, right? I mentioned earlier, you're thinking of maybe a couple people who you know are watching your recording or your yoga webinar. Offer these choices to those folks based on what you know of them, right? Especially in this environment, we're never going to be able to know what everyone needs, but we can offer some guesses. And if we're thinking about one person, it probably applies to more than just them, right? And then this goes back to resourcing. When we're offering shapes and breath, we can redirect the attention away from like accomplishing a yoga posture or a shape and more towards feeling better. And for those of you who've done training with me or otherwise in trauma-informed yoga or in trauma in general, we might call this cultivating the window of tolerance, right? Cultivating this place where we feel like, okay, this is hard, but I know what I can do with it. I'm going to call a friend, or I'm going to have some quiet time, or I'm going to go for a nice peaceful walk, or I'm going to snuggle with my puppy or my cat or whatever, right? So in terms of your yoga offering, connecting people to like what we're really looking for in this tree pose, right, is a sense that our energy comes to the midline. Like we're actually calling our energy away from all these other distractions and into our line of sight or into our foot or into our midline, right? So what's the result of that? Feeling more balanced, feeling more centered. Doesn't really matter if you fall out, if you're wobbling. We're looking for the result of just calling the energy in. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I can't see your faces, so I'm not 100% sure if it's landing. But you can follow up with questions after if there's things that are lingering about this, okay? So I want to move on. With offering choice in trauma-informed yoga, I want to be clear that this doesn't mean choice soup, right? This doesn't mean like, hey, we're going to do yoga class, maybe start in Shavasana or headstand or doing a backflip. You might be on your couch or in the ocean or in your mind. Like, there's so many options that most people, especially if they're new to yoga, are just going to be like, what are you talking about? And this happens, right? We learned, oh, trauma-informed yoga, I got to give choices. And then all of a sudden it's like students are just totally overwhelmed with choice. Like, what am I supposed to do? And that can be stressful in and of itself too, right? So not just alphabet soup, choice soup. Try to offer one or two options, like maybe three, that have specific reasons behind them, right? So let's see, like say your Shavasana, for example, and maybe you're doing a final rest at the end of your practice, you could offer a bolster under your knees if your back hurts, a blanket over your body if you're cold, a pillow on the top of your thighs if you want a little more grounding, right? There's three choices. People can go, oh, I feel that, I'm going to do it. And it's not this never ending, anything goes. If you said it at the beginning, anything goes, you can remind people throughout, but you don't have to say it with every single instruction because that can just get confusing. Fair? So an example is kind of choosing what you need. Do you need a little more soothing in your Shavasana? Try a bolster under your spine. Do you need a little more energizing? Try a bolster under your spine. Do you need a little more soothing? Try a bolster on top of your thighs. A couple choices, right? And some people, if they have infinite bolsters, you could do both, right? Okay, so you're offering empowering choices. With those empowering choices, with everything we're sharing through yoga, we can cultivate self-compassion through our teaching. Now, this is from, actually have it right here, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, Kindness, Common Humanity, and Mindfulness we're going to talk about. This is by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name right. These principles of self-compassion we can weave through. Now, self-kindness is one. We often talk about this as treating yourself as you would treat a dear friend or loved one. Many of you listening now, I know you take care of people, and you take care of people in the best way. You're so good to others. And sometimes if we can even offer like a drop of that to ourselves, if we could take our own advice for a moment. I'm totally hearing myself talk right now. Let me take my own advice for a moment and be so gentle, loving, supportive, patient with ourselves. That's an ongoing practice. Focusing on the common humanity, it's a little bit more accessible right now because there is this global commonality to what we're dealing with, right? There's a practice, this is from Pema Chodron, just like me, right? So when you see someone out, oh, there's someone going to get groceries with a mask on, just like me. You might even see someone on TV or connect with someone online. Oh, they're going through this just like me. They're a human being just like me. Having that common humanity can be really powerful. Okay, and there's tons of definitions of mindfulness, but present moment awareness, which we teach throughout most yoga classes, is a great anchor here. Without judgment is the other important piece of that. So I will say with this whole concept of self-compassion, and this is just an introduction, I highly recommend the workbook for really all humans, but yoga teachers, therapists, anyone who's kind of teaching or working with people, especially in the field of mindfulness, I'd recommend this. But there's an important concept behind it that differentiates self-compassion from self-esteem. Like I said earlier, the education systems we're raised in focus really more on accomplishment. What's your grade? What was your percentage? A little bit more, right, than what did you learn? And that can be a setup for getting our self-esteem from external forces, right, or external accomplishments. Oh, I got a good grade, or oh, I earned this thing, or I got this outside feedback. And then our whole sense of self is built really on external validation. And that's actually a quite flimsy self-concept if it's always leaning on something outside. So in the self-compassion research, and Kristen Neff talks about this, you could probably find, she did a TED Talk on it online, differentiating getting the self-esteem from accomplishment or from a yoga posture, right? We all know the yoga shapes are highly emphasized. They're what's on the cover of all the yoga magazines. They're what we highlight often when we share yoga is some kind of body shape or posture, right? Some yoga pose, right? If we shift away from that external achievement mindset, and you see this a lot with beginners in yoga, it's hard to get out of that, and more towards nurturing yourself, tending to yourself, listening to yourself, all these more compassionate aspects, then we're actually cultivating a sense of self that's more stable, right? It's less of a lean-to on external accomplishment. All right, so that's all I'll say about that. If you are more interested in this, I highly recommend the book. So that's Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, Self-Compassion Workbook 2018. Okay, so we got a few more minutes. I want to offer a few more things to you while we're here together. It's so helpful to have the option, even in a regular yoga studio, to offer self-touch. Touch is another huge topic within trauma-informed yoga. And most folks have gone to just don't touch your people. The other conversation around that is talk about consent, right? Consent needs to be front and center, in my opinion, if we're offering hands-on assists in yoga. That's off the table right now, right? Because we're all online and we can't touch each other. So if you have a practice that already uses props or uses some kind of touch, you could use props in place. You could also use self-touch as an option. Again, this is a good bridge in a normal yoga class between no touch, hands-off policy and hands-on policy, hopefully with consent. So using props, putting a block behind the heart tends to be a little bit uplifting. Some of you have seen the shape with one block behind your head, one behind your heart. You can change the levels, right? There's contact there. There's a way to build a little more awareness of the body and where it is in space, especially if someone's alone. They probably haven't had much sensation on their upper back. You can use a bolster, you can use blankets, you can really use any props or things that are around the house to bring them in to have a contact and some kind of relationship with the object, right? A blanket wrap, weighted blankets, all of those things can be really soothing. You can also offer these self-touch options. So palms touching is self-touch, right? Hand on hand. You might have seen in yoga classes this one where we really warm up the hands, and I know touching your face is kind of not the thing of the day, but if everyone's hands are clean, you can put your hands on your ears, practicing pratyahara, or on the forehead or eyes if it's, eyes are a little more touchy right now, okay, so maybe ears or forehead or sides of the head. You can also put your hands down on your thighs, right, pressing down in that grounding practice. So using hand on hand is a pretty distal, away from all the sensitive stuff in the middle of the body, way to bring contact into your class. I have also been in classes where we kind of reach out and imagine the person next to you. You might know someone else practicing at the same time. You might see someone else on the screen and you can sort of visualize that type of contact. A little bit more vulnerable, but also a little more of a connection there, right? The classic hand on heart, hand on abdomen, right? We can use these to build awareness of the breath, to build awareness of what's going on in the body. And this really circles us back to the beginning, because when we start getting into touch and into visceral sensations, particularly in our trunk and in our heart and abdomen or mind and throat, like these can be really vulnerable areas. So that's where, when people are feeling really intense emotion, when people are feeling overwhelmed, they might feel it there. It's not that we avoid that. It's just that we don't want to like end class in this position and then, without a touch point of a resource. So again, a resource, anything neutral or positive. Yoga teachers, like you guys do this pretty naturally, right? Like call something to mind, something you're grateful for. Right? I tend to end a lot of classes with like a genuine sense of gratitude. It might be a pet or a person or whatever that is. So with this self-touch, and as you're wrapping up your classes, I'd encourage you to come back to that resource and leave people with some little neutral or positive nugget. That the goal is to help bring a little more grounding, a little more self-regulation. Okay, so there's so much more we could say about all of this. This is just a little offering for those of you out here. I know many of you have reached out and said like, what am I doing? Or how do I do this? Or this is super awkward. So just to normalize that, yes, it's super awkward. It's a big change. It's really different. All of that is true. Just a quick review. First, resource. We just circled back to that. Then normalize, offer empowering choices to your folks, whether you can see them or not. Cultivate self-compassion, yes, that starts with you, and share that in your classes. And offer some self-touch options, whether that's through a prop or a makeshift prop like a towel, or whether that's through actual contact with, hand on hand, hand on body. Okay, so I want to give you some information, things that are coming up. I'm going to send out the recording to this in case there's something that you wanted to hear again or you want to share it with a friend. That's totally cool. Tuesday next week at noon Pacific, I'm going to give 3 yoga tools you can use when you can't get close to your patients. So this is more for one-on-one therapists. I see you guys. But also if you're doing one-on-one yoga, you would benefit from this. I will send the Zoom link out because you probably don't want that alphabet soup. You don't want to write that out. And you can't click on it on your screen right now. So I will send that link out to follow up. We also have an 8-week trauma-informed yoga Y4T online training program starting on May 4th. So if you're interested in that, all the information's on howwecanheal.com, and you can fill out your application there for that group. I have to sign off with this. Is anyone doing online goat yoga? Because if you are, please invite me. There are so many good reasons to involve animals, and just like I've said many times, and I think I said this earlier, like anything can be a resource or a trigger. So this is also true of animals, but there is such good reason why cat yoga and goat yoga and doga and all these things are resources out there and are found to be healing by a lot of people. So I said this last week too, but if you are feeling called to watch a lot of animal yoga videos or spend extra time with your pets at home, or just be in that energy of animals, mammals in particular, but not discriminating, I would say go with that and watch cute goat videos. Baby goats are an amazing resource, right, to close that loop. So thanks to each of you. I'm going to sign off now, and I know there are a few questions. Let me just see if there's, hi Hilda from Mexico, you're welcome, de nada. And oh, okay, yeah, let me show the book one more time. This is the Mindful Self-Compassion workbook. You're welcome. Oh, thank you guys. It's nice to see your names. Yay. Yay, connection. So there's another thing. You can use the chat function to actually see each other. You're welcome. The Mindful Self-Compassion workbook, a proven way to accept yourself, build inner strength, and thrive. Kristen Neff. Oh, trying to use the camera that way. Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, Germer. Okay. All right, guys. Bye, Jennifer, Nancy. Good to see you all. Hi in Montreal. Hi, Kristen. Oh, wonderful. Thank you all. Have a beautiful day, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.